Hello and welcome to this Tool Time presentation. The topic for discussion is setting a personal boundary of mine and improving my assertiveness. Setting a personal boundary of mine and improving my assertiveness. As I go through this meeting, perhaps I'll cut myself some slack and breathe. So if I find myself getting upset or disturbed, I might breathe in through my nose for 4, hold for a second, breathe out through my mouth for 8, hold for a second. Especially focusing on my diaphragmatic or belly breathing. Apparently focusing on my belly or diaphragmatic breathing, the way my belly moves in and out as I breathe, reduces nervous tension by 40 to 60%. I commend that idea to you as worthy of consideration. In, 2, 3, 4, hold, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, hold. I might do that any time during the day I'm feeling upset or disturbed. Having said all that, discomfort or upset or disturbance might actually indicate that growth is occurring or is becoming a bit more possible or likely. So I might actually give myself permission to feel uncomfortable and just see where that's leading me, or look at a possible cause of it. As I go through this meeting, I might choose to do what I can with what I have where I am. Do what I can with what I have where I am. In this presentation, and as a result of it, I ain't got to do nothing. I'm not required to do anything. I might choose to, however. If I see something in this meeting and I think, wow, gee, I really don't like the look of that, I might put it aside and never look at it again, or I might actually grab it and run with it. It's entirely up to me. I ain't got to do nothing. A quote taken from someone has been changed to make it first person rather than telling me what to do or you what to do. Speaking from I, me or my, less absolute and less telling. It is still usually attributed to the person. Where 2 question marks appear, I might consider pausing this presentation and writing my answer in my journal or on a piece of paper, or simply pondering the question and maybe framing an answer in my mind. It's entirely up to me. If I want to do that, I commend it to you as something that could be potentially useful. This session is about how I might choose to support and defend a thing that I value and my sense of my precious self. What might I value? What might I be passionate about? What tool might seek to capture this particular thing? Please consider pausing the presentation and maybe pondering an answer to that. The hierarchy of values, based on the work of Joe Gerstein, is designed to capture a value of mine. I commend it to you as something worth having a look at. Please consider clicking the link in the description box below. What might you value? What might be one thing from your hierarchy of values that you might wish to record? Please consider either getting out your hierarchy of values if you've got one, or maybe jotting down an answer or pondering it for a moment. Health, fitness, and loyalty are 3 that appear on my hierarchy of values. They used to be health and fitness together, but I've since separated them off and treat them as individual things that are, of course, related. I might decide that I value respect and consideration, getting it from someone else or giving it to another person, or even giving it to my precious self. Part of a hierarchy of values exercise, once a value of mine is listed, is to put my poison once used, my POU, poo, on the list beside my values. When I put my POU, poison once used, on my hierarchy of values list, how many of my values might be able to live with my poison once used, remain intact, or be expressed consistently by me? In what way might that be what I really want? I commend that exercise to you as something potentially helpful. Certainly respect and consideration that I might value seem to walk straight out the door when a poison once used, alcohol, drugs, an unhelpful habit walk in. Maybe I might choose to put my poison once used a little more out the door instead, and perhaps a thought, action, person, place, or thing that tends to lead to it as well. In defense of something I value, I might have chosen that my poison once used plays less or no further part in my life. I might choose to defend a value of mine against another threat to it by using a boundary with this other person. A possible key to effective boundary setting is perhaps knowing my precious self a little more, a belief of mine, a preference of mine, a goal of mine, or my intuition. A value of mine, simply a little more. As I attempt to get to know my precious self a little better, it may become a little more challenging for someone else to attempt to manipulate me or get me to do what they want. I have done an ABC regarding my interaction with this other person. I now have a belief that is tending to be more helpful or effective and a bit less demanding. If you haven't had a look at the ABC, it's in the description box below. I commend it to you as potentially helpful. I have attempted to lessen my excessive, unhelpful, or unnecessary emotional response. I may still have an emotional response as a human. It is pretty important that I do have an emotional orientation of some sort to give me a bit of energy in a direction I'd prefer to be going. The ABC, a quick look, is in the description box below. As I said before, I do commend it to you as potentially helpful. This person in my life is still appearing in some way to disregard a preference of mine for how I wish to be treated and the life I prefer to have. They seem to be acting in a way that is a bit unreasonable, a bit unhelpful for me, and a bit unhelpful to our having a warm, meaningful relationship. This relationship probably isn't working for me or my version of us as effectively as I feel it might. A way I might choose to interact with this person, or a way I might choose to be present in the world for a value of mine and my precious self, is passively or assertively or aggressively. Passive, I choose that you might push me like a cart or shopping trolley. No apparent will on my part, I'll go wherever you say. I may choose to have a dodgy wheel and resist in some way to conduct a bit of guerrilla warfare. Not openly, however, I still may do it. How likely might I be to achieve a goal of mine, support a value of mine, or end up where I would prefer to be in this case if someone else is pushing me? Please consider pausing the presentation and maybe pondering that or jotting down something. What might be a possible source of passive? Unreasonable must, number one. I must be perfect in everything I do at all times and always be loved, or I am no good and I deserve to be punished. The three major musts are in the description box below. Please consider clicking on them and perhaps having a bit of a look. Possible result, become a people pleaser, become very passive, maybe winding up resentful, avoiding people, anxiety, lowered self-respect. This is where I tend to remove a boundary of mine or have no boundary. Aggressive, I attempt to push you. I attempt to treat you like a shopping trolley without consideration for your will, a value of yours, or a defense of yours. A dodgy wheel could be present on your part, probably highly likely. You might conduct a bit of guerrilla warfare with me. As I attempt to push another person around, how likely is this to create a warmer, more meaningful, loving relationship? Please consider pausing the presentation and answering or having a look at this pretty obvious question. What might be a possible source of aggressive? Unreasonable must, number two. This other person must behave as I think they should at all times, or they are a damnable person and an enemy of mine. Possible result, upset, resentment. After all I've done for you. Oh, if it wasn't for you, well, you'll do it and you will like it because I said so. These tend to attempt to take away an other person's boundary. Possible effect of these two major musts. likely to contribute to unnecessary unhelpful upset in me and others, increased likelihood of a shorter-term choice of instant gratification or unhelpful addictive behaviour, rats, rather than a longer-term choice that is perhaps in my bit better interest or judgment. I could actually act assertively with someone. I choose to stick close to what is important to me as a person while I consider what you require as a person. Here is what is okay for me. Here is what is not okay for me. My boundary request, perhaps I'll set a scene. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I love you and I am committed to our relationship. I love and value so many things about you. In fact, that is why I am choosing to talk to you about this. I'd really like to keep you in my life and have a better relationship with you. It's probably going to be pretty helpful to have a reasonable working relationship with you. I'd like to explore that with you. I'd like to interact with you in a more helpful way if possible. Assertive, a formula for communicating a boundary. Inform, when you do your behaviour, I feel my response. Request, I prefer that you please consider behaving in this bit more helpful, considerate or kinder way. Stop or alter or change a behaviour. Inform you, if you are unwilling or unable to, I will take a specific action. My boundary, value, goal or preference supporting choice section. Of course, I might first choose to get used to the perhaps revolutionary idea that it is very okay for me to have a preference. I might have a thing that suits me as a person. That perhaps I have a thing on my hierarchy of values or a resultant goal that is important to me that I prefer to have in my life. The very revolutionary idea that maybe this is all okay. Who is a better person to defend a value of mine? Who else might when I choose not to? Will another person do it as thoroughly as I might? Who might be a better person than you to defend a value of yours, to speak up for a value or goal of yours? Maybe, perhaps I might choose to give myself a right to ask, to be treated with a bit more respect, dignity and consideration. It is probably not true that I deserve to be treated this way. Who says, someone might say, or I have a right to be treated this way. Who says another person. I certainly might still choose to give myself a right to ask that I can control. It is challenging to pour from an empty cup. The more I look after myself, the more I might have to give to another, and the richer that giving might be. There's a thing that is mentioned called the oxygen mask rule. The oxygen mask rule, if you've ever been on an aircraft, they say, please fit your oxygen mask before attempting to help another. You only have a small amount of time before you pass out, and then you can't help the other person or yourself, and you both perish. Me helping me helps me help you. Me helping me helps me help you. As an assertive person, I firstly defend a boundary of mine, while secondly attempting to respect a boundary of yours. It is wonderfully okay for me to say no. No is a complete answer. No is a complete sentence. No. No, thank you is a complete polite answer and sentence that I might choose to use. Of course, I ain't got to do nothing. No, thank you. Rather than I must have or I shouldn't, while it would be nice to have your approval and I might prefer to have your approval, I can probably live without your approval when I'm required to. While it may not be pleasant to have a confrontation or a deep discussion with you, and I might prefer it didn't happen, I can probably stand it if required. I am not, however, required to like having these sorts of conversations. Rather than there being blame here or a bad person, I am simply addressing a behaviour rather than a person. I am avoiding rating and blaming the other, or my precious self for that matter. This is an attempt to move toward a greater clarity in my life, a value of mine, which better suits me as a person. My boundary is about a value of mine rather than about manipulating or controlling the other person. They're free to do whatever they want. A caution: sometimes when I first look to address a behaviour in a healthy way, the other person may profess innocence and ignorance of what I'm talking. What? I've no idea what you're talking about or what you mean. That is definitely not true. I definitely don't do that. Another very important caution: being assertive with an overly aggressive person might give them an excuse to react violently. I may choose to keep myself safe. Please dial 911 if you're in the United States, or 000 if you're in Australia, or any other emergency number where you happen to be if needed. I may become aware of an exit strategy, a safety house. In the book, Get Your Loved One Sober, they talk about an exit strategy and a safety house. Please do consider reading that particular book or that excerpt of it. Maybe it is time to look at how much this person is required to be in my life. What are they adding to my self-expression or my sense of self? What is the real contribution they are making in my life? A boundary is all about me choosing to move toward being in a healthier relationship with this other person. A boundary tends to build trust by an agreement kept. It may be a respectful way of restoring a bit more effective communication in my relationship. Working toward building my respect for and belief in my ability to express myself through what I value. A boundary is maybe better as a permeable membrane rather than a wall. I might still experience the world around me and be open to it. A boundary is a bit like a picket fence. It might keep another person out of my space, while it also tends to keep me out of their space. A lovely picket fence around a beautiful garden. People can enjoy a flower of mine. They aren't able to pick it, certainly aren't able to trample over it. I'm tending my lovely garden, my life, with a boundary as I chat with the other person. Like the plastic barrier at a parade, it might be easily moved. However, it is there to protect me as it allows the show to go on by defining a bit of my space, my preferred show to go on. It is not lightly moved or lightly moved past or disregarded without a consequence of some sort. A boundary is like a velvet rope at the cinema. It is soft and pliable while definitely defining a no-go area for me. When might I consider setting a boundary? When I've looked at disputing an unhelpful belief, DUB, and done an ABC, and I still feel disturbed or upset or hurt or ignored, then perhaps I have an opportunity to look towards setting a boundary or attempting a more effective boundary setting conversation. It is probably helpful for me to consider being sensitive about my boundary, maybe choose to set it early, maybe choose to set it often, perhaps choose to defend it consistently. Sometimes I might do this imperfectly as a human. However, I give myself permission to be other than perfect. My responsibility when I choose to live it is to attempt to better define and more clearly communicate a boundary of mine to this other person. I may attempt to avoid doing it when I or the other person are using or drinking or recovering from using or drinking. May be better done as close as possible to the zenith of sobriety for me or another, rather than when intoxicated or suffering from an after effect. Perhaps better done when I'm a bit calmer rather than upset. Possibly better done when I'm as determined and in control of an emotion as much as possible, picking a suitable time and place. Assertiveness is helpful when tactful and aware where possible. While I love you dearly and want you in my life, this is important to me. I'm asking you to please pay attention and attempt to respect what I'm saying. Attempting to get my point across or need addressed without unnecessarily hurting or endangering someone else and particularly precious me. Please do keep yourself safe. A formula for effectively communicating a boundary: set the scene, love you, want a relationship. I believe this will work for both of us. Inform: when you do your behavior, I feel my response. Request: I prefer that you please consider behaving in this bit more helpful, considerate, or kinder way. Inform: consequence: if you are unwilling or unable to do this, I will take a specific action. As an example, I love going out and doing things with you. When you spring a last-minute plan on me, I feel frustrated and ignored. I prefer to have at least 3 days' notice for a change to a plan I've made. If you choose not to give me that time to plan, then I will choose to say no. Maybe practicing my boundary before I set it, either by myself or with someone who can be trusted. Since a behaviour tends to be fairly ingrained in a person, don't I know it? It is probably important to allow the other person some wiggle room to make a change in their behaviour. Maybe look for and acknowledge an attempt, unless the behaviour is really unacceptable. I might try to catch the person doing something helpful, just as I might choose to do for my precious self in my bit different life, or moving away from an unhelpful, addictive behaviour. The 3 C's of boundary setting or protection: I attempt to be calm, I attempt to be clear, I attempt to be consistent. If I'm not consistent, I tend to create the behaviour I'm trying to avoid. I might have a boundary supporting phrase: this conversation does not feel respectful or constructive at the moment, so it's probably better to end it and come back to it later. If you would like to continue this conversation, it's pretty important that you attempt to lower your voice. I'm seeing that this conversation is challenging for you as a person. Are you okay that we take a break and pick it up again later? Thank you very much to Gordon1 for these boundary supporting phrases. I trust you're keeping well. There's a video, The Power of Zero Tolerance by Isabel Mercier. I commend it to you as perhaps worth having a look at. The link is in the description box below. I might become my own hero. H, hush the chatter, get out my hierarchy of values, set a boundary, look for a goal from my hierarchy of values, perhaps do all this in writing. E, evaluate what and who I am tolerating in my life. R, ritualize a helpful daily habit that has the potential to, more likely, bring my better self to life. O, own what I stand for, own my own non-negotiable, own that I am responsible for what I tolerate. Perhaps own an item on my HOV, hierarchy of values, a little bit more. As of today, I might choose to look at a thing I tolerate, a thing, a person, a habit that is potentially unhelpful. Rather than attempt to make someone do something, rather than getting the other person to understand and comply, a boundary is about me getting a bit clearer inside my precious self about what is likely more appropriate and more helpful for my mental and physical well-being. Then taking an action accordingly when and where possible, while attempting to avoid a bit of mustiness on my part. Big question. What appropriate boundary might I have? In what way might I be setting a boundary to attempt to manipulate a situation or person? After I attempt to set my boundary, in what way am I letting go of an outcome? In what way is the person free to choose what they do? Big question indeed. While I might prefer they respond in a certain way, in what way are they free to respond any way they choose? I'm then free to choose to use a boundary request supporting option available to me, or do any other thing that I find supportive of me as a person. In what way is it probably in my better interest to act consistent with what I said might happen in the boundary setting request? My response: set a boundary, follow through. What might happen to my credibility with this person if I choose to be other than consistent, if I ignore a behaviour and let this person off this one time? What could happen with this whole boundary setting process if I'm not consistent? please consider pausing the presentation and either writing down or maybe pondering that for a moment. The purpose of having a boundary is to attempt to a little more, protect and take care of my precious self, just a tiny bit more. I am probably better served by letting this other person know when they are acting in a way that is harmful, inappropriate or unacceptable to me as a person, especially when it is to do with a hierarchy of value of mine. I may choose to keep myself safe. Please do dial 911 if you're in the States, or 000 if in Australia, or whatever other emergency number that you might need to dial. And please do press charges and get the person removed if they're threatening you or you feel unsafe, or remove yourself to a safe house or a safe place. It may be my choice to take a step to protect and defend myself through a boundary. I might choose to have a duty to defend myself, and I might choose to take my responsibility for how I allow this other person to treat me and how I choose to interact with a little bit of my world. Inform when you do your behaviour, I feel my reaction. How important is it to precede my feeling with I feel and to state my feeling out loud? When I say I am upset, I am hurt, I am tending to state that the feeling is who I am. It defines me. Probably a bit more helpful for me to say I feel upset, I feel hurt. That way I'm likely moving a little away from having the emotion define me, seeing it a bit as something I'm experiencing rather than I'm becoming. By stating my feeling out loud, I'm also affirming that I have a right to my feeling. I'm affirming that to my precious self. This is moving toward owning my feeling, taking my responsibility for owning my feeling and my reaction. That the other person might hear me and understand me could be important. It is perhaps far more important that I hear myself and acknowledge that I might give myself a right to have my feeling and do a resultant action. This other person isn't required to respect the preference of mine, and I still might have the ability to choose to have it regardless. The difference between setting a boundary in a healthy way and manipulation is, when I set a boundary, I attempt to let go of the outcome. The other person has a choice. I love to spend time with you and share my life with you. When you drink, I feel disconnected from you and I feel a sense of hopelessness. I'd prefer that you refrain from drinking 2 nights a week so we can do this thing together. If you choose to drink more than 1 bottle of wine at night, I will choose to sleep in the other bedroom. It can be very challenging to have a healthy relationship with a person who chooses not to attempt to have a boundary. Very challenging to communicate with a person who chooses not to attempt to do so directly and honestly. A helpful relationship and helpful communication are virtually impossible with a person who refuses to attempt these things. In what way do I really prefer that this no boundary ineffective communication behaviour is perhaps a behaviour of mine? Learning how to set a boundary may be a really helpful step in learning how to be a better friend to and better supporter of my precious self. To wade in amongst my genetics, environment, training and education, to at least attempt to take part in a way of my bit more active choosing. Attempting to voice my chosen right and chosen responsibility as perhaps a co-creator of my life along with my genetics, family, circumstance, training, education, experience, etc. Wading in amongst it. This other person might contribute to my life, and it is maybe a bit helpful that I perhaps choose to do so as well, as I'm a bit more able to. It is unlikely that anyone will be potentially more consistently interested and invested in my well-being than me, as I a bit more choose to be. If anyone's saying that anything on here is easy, it means they've obviously not done it. A notion I might like to entertain is that perhaps it's a bit more likely or a bit more possible than my darling brain is telling me right at the moment. I might like to entertain that thought. Maybe it is important to choose to learn to own my precious self a bit more, so that I might then choose to learn to be a bit more loving with my precious self, perhaps choose to have a bit more kind and loving relationship with my precious self. Maybe choose to begin to look out for what is perhaps in my better interest, to look to and defend my hierarchy of values list. A thing might then begin to alter in my life in a way that is maybe more likely to suit me as a person. I commend that idea to you. I may start to naturally set a boundary with this other person, speak what I see as my truth, own my chosen right to live a bit of my life, speak my chosen right to ask to be treated with respect, dignity, and consideration. I expect nothing more, and really, I'll accept nothing less. Over a thing I value in my hierarchy of values, HOV, I may choose to prefer that a boundary of mine is set. Passive, you push me, I may have a wonky wheel. Aggressive, I attempt to push you. You may have a wonky wheel, pretty likely. Assertive, I am not moving far from what I feel is important to me, while I consider what you prefer. When I feel upset, disturbed, or hurt, and this upset seems to be happening a lot over one thing, then perhaps I might look towards setting a more effective boundary. Along with an ABC, this may greatly enhance my emotional well-being. I choose to be sensitive about a boundary. I choose to set it early. I choose to set it often. I choose to defend it with a response. Set the scene, love you, want a relationship, inform when you do your behaviour. I feel my response. Request, I prefer that you please consider behaving in this bit more helpful, considerate, or kinder way. Inform, if you are unwilling or unable to, I will take a specific action. I enjoy eating dinner with you and spending time together. When you come home hours after you say you will, I feel abandoned and deeply lonely. I'd prefer that you come home when you say you will, or please call me when you are sidetracked. If you choose to not let me know your expected time home, I will choose to not prepare your food. There will be a note on the oven, your dinner is in the dog. Woof. Maybe not add that last part. My commitment is perhaps a challenge. When I am more committed to a value of mine, I'll tend to increase the likelihood of taking a path of some resistance, POSR. I might seek a deeper emotional connection and deeper relationship with a value of mine from my hierarchy of values. Rather than a path of least resistance, I might take a path of some resistance. The personal boundary notes is in the description box below. I commend it to you as a further exploration of boundary setting. My Assertive Rights, Manuel J. Smith's book, When I Say No, I Feel Guilty, published in 1975, outlined a 10-point bill of assertive rights. Assertive rights are a right to ask. I might choose to give myself as a unique human being. Manuel J. Smith stated that I have a right to things, but that's imposing something on someone else. I certainly have a right to choose to give myself something. A right I might choose to exercise is, I choose to give myself a right to evaluate the helpfulness of a behaviour, thought, or emotion of mine, and to choose to take my responsibility for its initiation, continuance, or consequence upon my precious self. I choose to give myself a right to evaluate the helpfulness of a behaviour, thought, or emotion of mine. I might give myself a right to choose to say no or no thank you. I might give myself a right to choose to offer no reason or excuse for justifying a choice or behaviour of mine. 7 tips on how to be more assertive from the Distilled Human. I choose to be more in touch with the value of mine on my hierarchy of values. I choose to test for reasonableness in writing. I choose to see the other person's point of view. I choose to signal flexibility with an option that suits me primarily. I choose to keep my delivery calm and matter of fact. I choose to use I feel and in my experience, and I have a policy. I choose to be a broken record in a different way or option. Historically, old vinyl records, if you've ever seen them, if they were broken, they'd get stuck on the one spot and just keep repeating the one part of a song just ongoing forever. So just be a broken, I just might choose to be a broken record and just keep repeating the same thing. I hear you, however, this is what I prefer. I might choose to give myself a right to not agree with this other person's opinion. I might choose to give myself a right to be illogical in making a decision, to go with a gut feeling. The link for the personal chosen Bill of Rights is in the description box below. I commend it to you as maybe worth having a ponder. A great relationship, rather than happening because two mind readers got together, likely happens as I attempt to let this other person know how I prefer to be loved. Thanks, RRB. I trust you're keeping well. When I choose not to set a boundary and choose not to hold a person accountable, I tend to feel used and mistreated. Thanks, Brene. I get what I tolerate. Thanks, Henry. I can say what I feel is important to say. I can gently and assertively speak my mind. I'm not required to be judgmental, tactless, blaming, or cruel when I speak a truth of mine. Thanks, Melody. As I choose to give, it helps to set a boundary, because a person who chooses to take might not be relied upon to effectively do that for me. I think you're right there, Rachel. A boundary is a part of my self-care. It is healthy, common, and necessary. Thanks, Doreen. The difference between me being a successful person and a really successful person is that a really successful person says no to almost everything. Thanks, Warren. My time is limited and I choose not to waste it by partly living someone else's life. Wow. Thanks, Steve. Rest in peace. As a compassionate person, I ask for what I require. I say no when I choose to, and when I say yes, I mean it. I'm compassionate because a boundary of mine keeps me out of resentment. Thanks, Brene. Setting a boundary is a way of caring for myself. It doesn't make me mean, selfish, or uncaring just because I don't do a thing this other person's way. I care about me too. Thanks, Christine. A boundary defines me. It defines what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I own and taking my responsibility for it gives me more freedom. Thanks, Henry. Daring to set a boundary is about having the courage to love myself more, even when this other person might choose to be disappointed. Thanks, Brene. A person in my life who respects a boundary of mine will love my will, my opinion, my separateness. A person who doesn't respect a boundary of mine is telling me that they don't love a no of mine. They only love a yes, my going along with what suits them. Thanks, Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Congratulations on using your power of choice and taking an action to be here. I commend and acknowledge you for doing something potentially helpful. Not only is it potentially helpful, it doesn't look all that powerless to me. Thanks, Brain. Britt Frank wrote a book, The Science of Stuck. I learned more about boundaries from reading that book than I had from a lot of other things that I've read. So thanks very much, Britt. If you haven't had a look at the book, The Science of Stuck, I commend it to you as something potentially pretty powerful. Some of her boundary material is on that link in the description box below. Resources that we used to create this meeting and all the quotes should be there. Please consider clicking the resources link in the description box below. If someone tells me, as I said before, that a thing in this presentation is easy, it's a solid indication. It means they have obviously not tried to do it if they think it's easy. A thing that I might like to entertain or consider is that a thing in here is perhaps a little bit more possible than my wonderful darling brain is telling me right at this moment. Thanks, brain. Good to see you're still there. Whatever I can manage to do at this particular time is wonderfully okay. I am at the coalface. I'm doing the work. Whatever I can manage to incorporate into my life is wonderfully okay. If I got a bit from the meeting, perhaps I'll give a bit. If a light came on for me a tiny little bit, perhaps I'll pay some of the light bill. Please consider easy for me to say, please consider donating a little to whoever or whatever helps you a tiny bit. In this case, I'd ask you to please consider clicking on the link in the description box below and giving a little bit to the Greater Good in Action Berkeley website, GGIA, or the Greater Good in Action, greatergood.berkeley, or the GGIA in the description box below. Both sites have information, and in the GGIA, on the GGIA website, they've got actual tools, techniques, and mindsets I can work with to move my life in a bit more helpful direction. I really do love them and commend those tools to you. I'm sorry I won't get to meet you probably. I do commend and acknowledge you for doing something potentially helpful. I trust you got something from the meeting, and please take care.